we are outside so that we can prolong the holiday feel. And another way of always prolonging holiday feels is to have really good books for you so that you can leave this world and immerse yourself in another one to start with. So I've got 4. It's not a lot today, but first one up, Dinuka, McKenzie's Taken. This comes to us from HarperCollins. Now, put that there. McKenzie already wrote, or she wrote a year or two ago, the Torrent, which was her first Australian great female detective, Kate Miles. And if you haven't read that one, it doesn't matter, you can read this one anyway. We go back to Detective Kate Miles, and in this story we have a household where a baby has disappeared from its, where the mother says it was sleeping, its bassinet, and while the mother was temporarily distracted by something else. And the only sort of the group of people who live in this household are said baby mum, a toddler son from an earlier relationship, a current partner, and sometimes this girl's mum pops in and out. So you've got a very small cast, and these are often, this is, you know that you're going to be having a great little look at all of this particular small community. There is a lot of focus on this girl's ex, who's the father of her toddler, Daniel, and he was incredibly abusive and violent. So Detective Miles is walking into this case, herself having just given birth, and if you had read the previous one, you'll know that the end of that book is quite traumatic. The birth is not a serene experience necessarily. So she's struggling with her own sort of readjustment to going back to work, having a very young baby. She's got a wonderful partner who's very supportive and is taking on most of the home duties, and she also has a young son. So she's sort of, if you like, moving. Her universe and this other woman's universe reflect each other in very many ways. Miles also has a complicated relationship with her father and a complicated relationship with her superiors on the force. So all of these are just, it's an amazing kind of set of emotional situations which give this novel enormous depth. What I really like about Mackenzie's writing is that she never oversimplifies. She gives us very real people, well, our detectives are never free of their little foibles, but Miles is very, she comes through as being very true, as being very fragile, a real warts and all character. But so do so many other of the characters in this particular story. She's very good at that. She gives you a complex, simple setup, but she makes it superbly complex. Gritty enough, good, very good, intelligent reading, great plotting. I really, really love this, and I suppose I will say that even though it's not superficial, it's a page turner, it does, and I think it's a very clever way of doing it. She isn't looking away from domestic violence, and I mean, for those of you, I'm not going to baby you, and that's not a joke. She's not looking away from it, and it's very realistically done and very enjoyable, which is not always easy for domestic violence. That's my first one. Second one up is we have The God of No Good by Sita Walker. This comes to us from Ultimo Press. Now this is memoir, debut, and it's one of those memoirs where I went, oh, thanks be to God, in a way, thanks be to God, because that's an odd thing to say about every memoir is important, but this one seems to be one of those ones that manages to be sort of cozy as well as relevant, if that makes any sense. It covers a lot of geography in that we're following many generations of particularly women. We move from India, Tehran, Czech Republic, and all over Australia. It's narrated from the point of view of Sita herself, so she's the 6th generation in this, and she's looking at her back at the story of her mother and her mother's mother, the women who came before her and their relationship to their Baha'i faith, which makes a very lovely read about that too. But I sort of took away from this more that it was a story about, more a story about love, irrespective of whether the faith is what seems to support your love, or whether it's just that faith is an expression of love. It was a very, not so much thought-provoking as a very enjoyable, you don't sort of have to stop and step out of the universe of this, because it doesn't necessarily want you to address things that are bleak. There are difficulties in all of these generations, as you know, this is life, and that's basically what she's saying. This is a sort of a fan of the cards of this family's, what was dealt to them and how they dealt with it, and how faith manages to to help. In Sita's case, she starts out this this memoir by saying, her husband saying to her that he's lost his faith and he's also no longer, he wants a divorce. And this sort of seems to not unmoor, which is that very bleak sort of sense, but she finds that she's looking then at her own idea of marriage and her own idea of faith, and realizes that it's not the same, and maybe she's lost it. Is that something that is passed down through the generations, and what can she take from what her parents and her previous generations, what they believed? And what strength does she get from that? It's a very, and I was interested in this, is she writes in a very almost self-deprecating tone. She almost doesn't believe she's worthy of ever loving anybody else. So there's another very nice little thread in there. She does say, and there's one thing I was interested in, she does, stylistically, it's written in not oversimplified, but very, very simple prose, because I think this brings it away from being overwrought or over sophisticated, over aware of itself. It's almost sweet without in any way detracting from the sometimes shining pearls of sentences she has in there. A very, very lovely read for everyone, and you can give it to someone who wants a quiet read, or is just really interested in the narrative of somebody else's life that is probably quite different to their own. So an excellent one for lived experience. Very much enjoyed that one. Something a bit different. The Mysterious Case of the Albertson Angels by Janice Hallett, and this comes to us from Viper, which is Shepherd's Tale. Oh my goodness. Now, Janice Hallett, some of you may have read, an English writer who brought us The Appeal and the Twyford Code. And her trademark is a kind of an interactive, if you like, experience. Now, without that sounding like, oh my God, interactive, I'm going to have to scan something. It's one of those reads where, irrespective of what the content is that we're dealing with, and it's always, you know, a whodunit murder sort of thing, you're being asked to review the material as Hallett presents it to you. And at the end, at the beginning, she prefaces this by saying, I want you to review this, and I want you to decide by the end of it whether or not you would make this public or not. And you're going into this story saying, what would be the reasons for me not to do that? So we're already in that moral territory of truth versus can you tell it? And what are the risks to yourself and to others if you do? We have three main characters, I think. We've got Amanda Bailey, who is a reporter, Oliver Menzies, who is another reporter, and these two have been hired or commissioned by their respective publishing companies to take a new angle on an old cold case. And Amanda Bailey chooses the Alperton Angels, which was a cult where the members believed that they were angels, and the higher members obviously were archangels. And this story, this was a 20-year-old story, and the story, as Amanda knows it, is that the leader of this cult is actually still in prison because he got away. The others had, I suppose, brainwashed a pair of teenagers, and there's a baby, and then this baby, they're told, is the Antichrist, and it's going to have to be sacrificed so that all the angels will come and save the world, or some such. So this Amanda and Oliver end up actually working on the same story. They're kind of competitive, and yet they know each other, and there's personal history. I found it absolutely riveting, not only because I sort of was looking for the inconsistencies. I also loved it for the third main character, who was the Ellie Cooper, who was transcribing everything that Amanda wrote, because we're kind of sided with Amanda on this one. And Ellie starts out by just writing up every interview and everything, transcribing them, and begins to add her personal notes, and it's a very interesting thing to watch. I think by the end of it, you've understood, you come to your own conclusion about what has happened and whether or not you should publish. But it's also an incredibly sort of deviously clever, fiendish way of looking at cults, looking at persuasive power, looking at the power of journalism, looking at what we do and don't publish. She covers a huge amount of other material while you're kind of enjoying yourself doing your task. I found it absolutely startlingly interesting as a read, and a very different way of doing a procedural police story. Last one up. Samantha Shannon. There's a reason for this face. Samantha Shannon, A Day of Fallen Night. And without being facetious, though I'm always a bit facetious, it's like no words. And I should really cut there and say no words, but you mightn't be any the wiser. This is this novel. It's fantasy. Comes to us from Bloomsbury, and Samantha Shannon has written quite a lot, but her most recent one was called The Priory of the Orange Tree, and you may have seen me heard me rave about that one. And this is set in the same universe, in a prior. It's prequel in terms of time. She's just astonishing, really, Samantha Shannon, and this is an astonishing book, and you'll know that if you read the first one, that you're going to love this one. It's as good, if it's not better, I don't know. If you've never read her and you're thinking fantasy's, possible for you, it's perfectly fine to start with this one. Shannon, I think, is probably unequalled, there are many very, very good fantasy writers. What I particularly love about her is that she has these two universes, the Priory of the Orange Tree and then the Queendom of Innis. And you're situated, for the storyline is always chopping and changing between its different characters. But in both of them, you have she inspires loyalty. You're loyal to both, even though you might have a preference for the Queendom of Innis, or you might have a preference for the Priory. But she keeps us in a state of balance between how much we love the characters in both. So we're not dealing with good and evil from these two, even though they are two halves of the same narrative. And these are two faiths and two cultures that are constructed quite differently from the same legend, or it's a truth, but it's a legend. It's like the saints. The evil is always exterior, and or in the first one was exterior, and in this one it is the waking of the Dread Mount, which is sort of volcanic mountain, and it spews forth these worms, and everybody has to gang up together and slay those. There are several kingdoms, and they're all vastly different. You can feel kind of the influences from certain landscapes that we would know, but then she creates something exotic out of all of that, and they are just delicious beyond belief to travel in. Every emotion, you've got these sort of all of the things that you'd expect, the sort of the betrayals, the lack of confidence, and then the spite, the spying, all the negative things, and then all the positive things. There's plague, there's these worms, then there are the good dragons of the east, which rise up at the time. We can't not have dragons. I suppose what I admire beyond anything really is the balance that Shannon shifts away from sort of rewriting the patriarchal narrative into giving the matriarchs of the deciders. They're the queens, they're the bloodlines, and the warriors are all female. She writes the most amazing, mature woman love story that I have read in a long time, because it was completely not compelling, that's one of those words which you think, yeah. But you were right in there saying, this is true, it's real, this really works. And she just nails that. She nails everything. I was completely blown away by that one. You can't tell, can you? But that's it. All of these are lovely, probably for different readers, or unless you're like me, read everything, in which case they are all for you.